Hello, welcome to BM6611 Managing Brands and the topic of managing brands over geographical boundaries and market segments. In this session, we're going to look at how we manage brands over different demographic and subcultural and metacultural segments within country markets, and also how we manage brands across international market boundaries. We'll look at the rationale for going international, what makes organisations take their brands into different countries all over the world. And then we'll finish the session by looking specifically at the requirements for global branding, when you need to adjust, modify and adapt elements of your branding to make it fit within international markets. So let's look first of all at demographic and cultural segments, particularly starting with demographic. It can be quite easy for organisations, marketing managers and brand managers to sort of slip into a bit of a rut in terms of just thinking about their customer base as the people who bought yesterday, the people who bought last week, and particularly to consider younger consumers as more important than other age groups. And it's also very important to realise that older consumers are very, very, very valuable in terms of spending power. People are living longer, they're living healthier lives, they are spending a large proportion of their life in active and relatively affluent retirement. And of course, here I'm talking primarily about the developed world, Europe, North America, etc. And so brand managers need to be aware of the fact that if they have a brand that appeals to very young people, they're missing out. And maybe they need to develop a new brand for a more mature market. Equally, you can have a problem where the brand's customer base is aging. The customer franchise has been stable for a long, long time, and the brand has grown old or grown older with its customers. And the challenge there is how to bring younger consumers into the brand franchise, whether that can be done with the existing brand as it is, whether a sub-brand is required, or indeed whether a whole new brand is required within the organisational portfolio to appeal to younger consumers. So it's really important to think about branding across the age spectrum and to consider all the different age segments. In some countries in the world, there are very large, important subcultural segments. For example, in the USA in 2020, there were over 62 million Hispanic people. That makes up 18%, just over 18% of the population. Now, the Hispanic population in the USA is extremely important from a marketing and brand management point of view. It's got an annual buying power of 1.7 trillion US dollars. So it's very valuable financially. But even more important, perhaps, is the fact that it's growing faster than both the white and the black populations. So you will see examples, particularly in some geographical areas in the USA, where the Hispanic market is the main market that is targeted, and organisations are translating their brand materials into Spanish, using brand elements and tapping into secondary associations that are meaningful and relevant to that all-important Hispanic or Latino subculture. However, we also have, set against this within-country subcultural segmentation, we also have cross-national segmentation, if you like, pan-national or meta market segments that straddle across country boundaries. And one of those is referred to as global consumer culture, a cultural entity not associated with a single country, but rather a larger group generally recognised as international and transcending individual national cultures. That's a quote from Alden et al. Back in 1999. Now, global consumer culture, this group, often abbreviated as GCC, tend to be affluent, educated, younger, professional, urban, metropolitan individuals who have very similar responses to marketing, very similar needs for products and services, and respond to marketing and to brand management in similar ways, regardless of where they live in the world. They drink cappuccinos, they eat sushi, they wear jeans, they wear Vans, they wear Crocs, they consume Apple devices, etc. And this is an equally important cultural group. It's not restricted to any one country, but it's a very valuable group for certain sorts of brands, designer clothing, luxury goods, technological products, etc. And Cleveland and LaRoche back in 2007 developed a measurement scale that could be used in market research studies to evaluate the extent to which people were responding or becoming acculturated to this global consumer culture and moving away from their own individual cultures within their countries. So here on this slide, we see some examples of why we can't afford to ignore older age groups. Older people are healthy and fit. They have demand for health and fitness products, gym memberships, activewear clothing, etc. Older people can be fashionistas too. And because they have quite a lot of disposable income, they're a very important target market for the very high-end haute couture clothing sector, luxury designer clothing. And older people are technologically literate, technologically enabled. They use smartphones, tablets, laptops, etc. to communicate with each other, to communicate with their families. So they're a very important market in many product and service sectors. Here we can see our Hispanic subculture within the USA, and the panel, or the infographic panel on the left, reinforces some of the points that I made a minute ago about the growth and the value of this population, and also the key areas of the United States where the Hispanic population is dominant: California, Texas, Florida, for example. So again, a very, very important market for companies operating in the USA. And here we have a graphic illustration of our global consumer culture. The fact that these large, globally standardized brands that are pretty much the same everywhere, McDonald's, Mercedes, American Express, Disney, Visa, Michelin, Starbucks, Nike, etc. You can see many, many examples here. Also Shell, Federal Express, Chanel, and so on and so forth. No matter where you are in the world, the global consumer culture segment, who is acculturated to respond to these brands, will respond in a pretty similar way. It doesn't really matter whether you are a 28-year-old lawyer living in New York or New Delhi or in Sydney, Australia. Your demand for certain types of products and services, clothing, alcoholic drinks, coffee-based beverages, credit and financial services, will be quite similar. And here we can see illustrations of this through photographs of young people from all sorts of different countries around the world. And there's more that brings them together and unifies them, that divides them. Yes, their skin colours may be different, their hair colours may be different, but clothing is very similar, and use of products and services, accessories, footwear brands, very, very consistent. So we've looked at demographic and subcultures, and we've looked at metacultures and at this growing and ever more important global consumer culture. Let's now look at why marketing goes international, why marketing managers and brand managers take their brands overseas, away from their original country of origin. Well, one driving factor is that there's a sort of a view that the grass is always greener elsewhere. There's a temptation to think that outside of the home market, growth will be faster, competition will be less intense. Sometimes that is indeed the case. And organisations that are based originally in relatively small markets like Sweden or Denmark or Finland will saturate those markets very, very quickly and will need to go outside of their domestic market to look for growth. Organisations that come from large markets, such as the USA or China, can wait much longer before they need to become international. And it's interesting that it really is only in the last 10 to 15 years that we've seen Chinese brands start to make an inroads into European and North American markets. Up until that point, there was no need for them to do so because they had so much growth at home, so much domestic growth. They didn't really need to seek business elsewhere. But as domestic growth in China started to slow, these organisations started to market their brands outside of Chinese borders. And also, there's often a belief that you'll get more profit overseas, that there'll be greater opportunities to reduce costs and hence enhance profitability. And as we'll see, that can very often be the case. One of the main ways in which costs can be reduced is through economies of scale. And if you have a relatively small domestic market, then your ability to capitalise on economies of scale is going to be limited. If you start to manufacture your products for a wider range of markets, a larger number of customers in your home market and also overseas markets, but you continue to manufacture in one place, then you really can start to capitalise on economies of scale. So all other things being equal, the more countries you sell your product into, the more product you have to make, the larger your economies of scale, and the more cost benefits you will accrue. A very compelling reason for going international is to diversify your risk profile. An organisation that is only operating in one country is totally dependent on that one country market. And if that country has a recession or any other sort of economic or indeed political problem, then the organisation is extremely vulnerable. And so diversifying your business operations across a wider range of countries and regions in the world enables you to spread your risk and reduce the overall risk profile. And another reason for going international is that in some markets, your customers are themselves global. If you think about business to business market like management consulting, a large management consultancy organisation like Accenture is pitching to major global corporations around the world for consultancy projects. Those clients that Accenture is talking to are themselves global. HSBC, Ford Motors, etc. Large organisations that operate in a very wide range of countries around the world. And therefore, Accenture and its competitors, McKinsey, Bain, etc., EY, all of these large accounting firms, management consultancy firms, they need themselves to be global because they want to put on a consistent face to their customers wherever their customers encounter them. So it shouldn't matter whether Ford are talking to Accenture in London or in New York. They should be getting the same message, the same proposals, the same prices. So if your customers are global, you need to be global too. Let's now look specifically at global branding. And there are three topics that we're going to cover in the remainder of the session in relation to global branding. First of all, we're going to look at the advantages and the disadvantages of having a global marketing program for our brands. Then we're going to look at the all-important decision of standardization versus adaptation. When we are internationalizing our brands, when our brands are becoming more global, we need to decide what is going to be standardized, i.e. what about the brand is going to be kept the same everywhere, and what we need to adapt, in order to meet local cultures, local differences in currency, and so on and so forth. And then we'll finish up by looking at some tips and guidelines for building a strong, successful global brand. So, first of all, let's look at the advantages of having a global marketing program for your brand. Now, as we've said already, one of the main advantages is economies of scale. If you are making your product available in lots and lots of countries around the world, then you can get economies of scale in production and in distribution, provided you continue to manufacture your product in one place or in a small number of places. You can also benefit from lower marketing costs, particularly if you offer a range of products under a single brand name in many countries around the world. If you keep your branding consistent, the same packaging, there's possibly the same advertising or largely the same advertising with perhaps some local modifications of translation into another language or dubbing an advertisement into another language. Another advantage is consistency. If you are taking a global approach and thinking about standardizing whatever you can, then you get consistency in your brand positioning, consistency in the brand's points of parity with its competitors and its points of difference against its competitors across the world. Now, the assumption there is that the competitors are pretty much the same everywhere. And as we'll see later on in this session, that is not always the case, particularly in business to consumer marketing. But if your brand positioning is consistent, then your brand image is consistent. And the more consistent your branding, the more positively consumers remember it, respond to it, it becomes more memorable. The more you change things everywhere, the less memorable the brand is. The brand equity is not built so quickly and strengthened so effectively. Operationally, it's good to think global and to think of all of the markets that you might operate in as a sort of a single entity, because then you can leverage it and transfer good practice. If one operating division has a very good idea for a new product or a change to packaging, or an element of the integrated marketing communications mix, which works very successfully, that can be transferred to other similar country markets and adapted for other markets that may be a little bit different quickly and efficiently. So you can leverage these good ideas and make the most of good practice all over the world. And of course, another powerful advantage of thinking global is that the organization can maximize its control. Global marketing is a command and control operation, with the marketing planning generally being done at headquarters centrally and largely standardized marketing and branding plans sent out to local country operating divisions, perhaps giving them some leeway, some autonomy to make adjustments to certain elements of the operational marketing. But it is much, much easier to control this way of approaching marketing from the centre out to countries than by starting and letting country operating divisions have complete control over the brand, pricing, etc. So Apple is a very, very good example of standardized global marketing programs. Everything pretty much the same everywhere, regardless of the country, the region in the world. Similarly, MasterCard, HSBC, and IBM, all examples of organizations which largely standardize what they do, which take a very global perspective and global orientation to their marketing and their brand management. And of course, 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, as it was originally once called, but has gone by the name of 3M everywhere. The organization that is perhaps best known for excellence in innovation and new product development. And the investment that it makes in that innovation is rapidly transferred across country markets all over the world, because of its global orientation to its marketing and the very heavily standardized nature of its brand. However, there's always a however, isn't there? Set aside those advantages, there are some pretty profound disadvantages of standardized global marketing, standardized global brand management. And they're listed here. It's all about the fact that actually often people are not the same everywhere. Now you'll see the word consumer appears in the first two bullet points there. And it is absolutely true that the disadvantages of standardizing your marketing are more acute, more readily seen, and potentially therefore more dangerous in the world of business to consumer marketing than they are in business to business marketing. Business to business markets tend to be more homogeneous. If you think about it, if you are a dentist and you have a dental practice and you employ 4 dentists, 2 hygienists, 6 dental nurses, 2 receptionists, and you have a property that has consulting rooms, a reception area, etc. Your requirements for staff, for surgical instruments, for hygiene, for uniforms that the staff will wear, products to make the patient's experience less scary, is pretty much the same. The whole dental experience is pretty much the same, regardless of where you are in the world. And so that business to business market of dental products for dentists, business to business selling, so dentist drills and equipment and so on, is going to be largely standardized. Similarly, if you're an accountant, if you run an accountancy practice, you've got similar sorts of needs for computer software, computer hardware, office furniture, etc., regardless of where you are in the world. So we see much more standardization in the world of business to business marketing than we do in business to consumer. And that's because of these very clear disadvantages set out on the screen here. We're going to go through these. Let's start with the first 2 bullet points. It may be that we cannot really standardize our marketing and our brand management because on a country by country basis, there are quite profound differences in consumer behavior, in what the consumer needs and wants, in how they use our products. Also, there may be profound differences in how consumers respond to individual elements of the marketing mix, like advertising or sales promotion. So let's look at those 2 points first. Yogurt. Differences in consumer needs, wants and usage. There cannot be a better example than yogurt. I've just picked 4 examples here of the different ways in which yogurt is sold and packaged and used around the world. On the top left, we've got Turkey, where yogurt is plain, natural, thick, and is ubiquitous, used every day, mixed with cucumber, mixed with garlic, mixed with mint, mixed with honey, mixed with walnuts, eaten on its own, used in cooking. It is an everyday part of life, sold in big containers, no flavours, no frills, no fancies, but turned into wonderful things in the home and in restaurants. Bottom left, we have yogurt in Sweden. It's not so thick and it's sold in tall, gable-topped Tetra Pak cartons in supermarkets. Relatively limited range of fruity flavours because this is a ubiquitous breakfast food, poured out into a bowl, eaten with fresh fruit at breakfast time. Over on the other side, we have France and the UK, who have taken yogurt in a completely different direction as a dessert. And you can see here that we have much smaller packs, sweeter flavours, and the addition of crunchy bits, fruit purees, toppings, etc. So you can't standardise your marketing and your brand management across the whole world for yogurt when yogurt is consumed in such radically different ways. Have a look at this and bring your thoughts to our classes for this session. This slide here shows 3 frames that would be used in a print advertisement. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3. The product in question is Tide laundry detergent. I want you to look at it and think about it, and then tell me when you come to class, will this print advertisement for Tide work everywhere in the world, in every single country in the world? If it will, that's great. If you think it won't work in some places, why might that be? Just sticking on the topic of communication styles, Edward Hall made an enormously important contribution to our understanding of interpersonal communication when he introduced the concept of high versus low context culture in terms of communication style. And he introduced this way back in the 1970s, but it's still widely used today, not just in marketing, but in human resource management, organizational behavior studies, and a whole host of other areas. Essentially, what Edward Hall I noticed was that within countries, within cultures, people communicate in very different ways. And this doesn't just mean that they speak different languages. This isn't about the fact that the Japanese speak Japanese and the Germans speak German. This is about the extent to which the whole meaning in a communication message is made very explicit or is actually quite implicit and hidden or coded. So up at the top right of the slide, we have what Hall refers to as high context cultures. Japanese would be a very good example. In the Japanese culture, the culture is extremely homogeneous. It's an in-group. There aren't very many out-groups. There are no subcultures to speak of. Not much immigration has happened. People don't need to spell everything out in their communications. Lots of things can be implicit, can be almost sort of coded into a message. And so what is said is more than the words. What is communicated is way more than the words. Who is saying the message, what they're wearing, what they're doing, how they're standing, all sorts of little signals and clues and cues to the total meaning are given outside the actual words. Body language, facial expressions, and so on. Down at the bottom left, you have essentially North European cultures. Completely the opposite. These are, according to Hall, low context cultures in terms of communication style. Communication is very direct, very straightforward. The meaning is entirely in the words. There is no hidden message, no symbolism. It's very simple, straightforward, and direct. So you can imagine if you are a brand manager and you have a brand that straddles all of these different cultures, it might be quite difficult for you to standardize your advertising because people are going to respond to communications, to what they see, what they hear in very, very different ways. So this cultural context and how it affects communication style must be taken into consideration when planning advertising across country markets. So we've looked at how differences in consumer needs and usage of products can make it hard for us to standardize our marketing on a global basis. And we've looked at how consumers respond to marketing mix elements like advertising in potentially very different ways. And again, that can make it hard to standardize what you do everywhere. Also, there may be between countries differences in the stage of a brand or indeed a whole product category's development, differences in the competitive environment. So I've taken Guinness as an example here of a brand that has a very different positioning, a very different image in different parts of the world. So on the bottom left, you can see a Guinness drinker in Ireland. It's a pretty standard, ordinary drink. It's part and parcel of Irish pub life. No great shakes. It's loved. It's drunk. But it's not a glamorous product. It's not a prestige product. It's an everyday product. On the other hand, in parts of Europe, outside of the UK and the Republic of Ireland, and indeed parts of North America, Guinness is positioned as a luxury prestige beer. It's expensive, it's drunk in high class bars and restaurants rather than ordinary everyday pubs. So again, you can see for the Guinness brand management team, it's quite hard for them to standardize what they do everywhere when their customer base is so very different on a country by country basis. There can also be differences in the legal environment within which marketing and brand management operate on a country by country basis. For example, is it legal to use what's known as comparative advertising, where you directly compare your product with a competitor product and say it's better because, or it's cheaper, and quote prices? That sort of direct comparative advertising is legal in the United States, for example, but is not legal in some other parts of the world. Is it legal to advertise to children? That is illegal in many Scandinavian countries. It is not illegal to target any advertising to children at all. So again, the legal infrastructure must be taken into consideration. If you simply standardize what you do everywhere, you could potentially find yourself breaking the law in some parts of the world. There can be differences in marketing institutions, such as distribution channels, the way the internet works, etc., the social media in different parts of the world, again, that make it difficult, to just standardize what you do everywhere. And there can be differences in general administrative procedures regarding accounting, finance, legal policies, and so on. So just going back to marketing administrative systems like distribution channels, here's an example of vending machines. Of course, we have vending machines all over the world. They are ubiquitous. We're used to them. But in Asia, particularly in Japan, the vending machine takes on a whole different life of its own. There are many, many more vending machines in Japan per head of population than pretty much anywhere else in the world. They're much more highly developed. And you can get pretty much anything in a vending machine in Japan. There's one on the right here that is actually dispensing fresh eggs without breaking them. You can drop off and collect dry cleaning. You can buy fresh flowers. You can buy alcoholic drinks. You can buy ready meals. Many, many things can come out of a vending machine in Japan. It's not used there as a distribution channel the way it is in the UK, the USA, Canada, France, etc., primarily for soft drinks and snacks. So you have to recognize that. And brand management teams, such as the Pringles brand management team, really need to understand the importance of vending machines in Asia. And you can see the photograph on the left illustrates that they've very much done that with these customized brand specific vending machines which dispense Pringles. Okay, so let's now look in a bit more detail about this all-important topic of standardization versus adaptation. It really is the big dilemma that the global brand manager has to deal with. What should be standardized? What should be adapted? Where should the balance lie? Ideally, you standardize what you can get away with standardizing without affecting the customer experience. So things that are not that relevant to the customer, that don't affect the way the product works, if it needs to work on a different basis, etc. And you adapt what you need to adapt in order to meet local consumer requirements, taste preferences, local usage situations and conditions, and to counter strong local competitors. So first of all, you need to look at each of the country markets that you are going to be operating in and see what stage they're at in their market development, or indeed the product life cycle. Now, it may be that if we think about Guinness, Guinness has been around in Ireland for many, 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 many years. Ireland is far from a new market for Guinness, but the first time that Guinness was marketed in, say, Australia or France, completely different. In a new market, people may be completely unaware not only of this brand, but of this whole product category. This dark black beer called stout that's got a creamy white head and a bitter taste, and it's much thicker than normal kinds of beers and lagers. So in new markets, there's a need to create awareness from scratch, to build brand salience from the bottom up. So there might be a need to do a great deal of advertising for the brand or the umbrella brand, or the products under the brand name if it's an umbrella brand, to simply build depth and breadth of salience so that customers in this new market start to become aware of the brand name, start to become aware of what the brand is. And also, it may be necessary in this basic new market advertising, fundamental starting point advertising, to explain the benefits of the whole product category, why you would drink a beer called stout, what's in it for you, what does it taste like, what does it do, etc. So that is the job that Starbucks had back when they first entered the Chinese market in the early 2000s. Now, this is actually a picture from some years ago, and it's taken in Beijing. And there is a Starbucks coffee branch there. You can see the sign behind these people, and you can see that there are two Starbucks branded umbrellas, street furniture umbrellas. They're not open. And indeed, the furniture that the people are sitting on belongs to the Starbucks coffee shop, and that's where you're supposed to sit when you come out with your coffee. Problem is, these people don't know what Starbucks is. The sign isn't in Chinese, so they can't read it. They've never heard of Starbucks. They don't know what it is. So they think these nice tables and chairs have been just put out for them to have a picnic. So they've got their own food. They're eating their own food. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with Starbucks. So Starbucks have failed here with these particular people to build any kind of salience, either depth or breadth, to get the name recognized and to get it recognized as a place where you go in to buy a coffee-based drink. On the other hand, in a mature market, the job is very different. Here, your brand has been around for a while, and so you're focusing on explaining to people why they should be buying your brand rather than the competition. So you're promoting the specific products under the brand, new varieties, new features, new functionality, etc. You're communicating the brand's USPs or points of difference so that it is clear in the mind of the consumer how your brand compares with others and why they should buy it. And you're continually reinforcing the brand, continually advertising and promoting and supporting it to reinforce the awareness, to keep the brand fresh in the mind of the customer, to remind them so that even though they're familiar with it, they don't forget about it. And so Starbucks in the USA is in this kind of position. Starbucks is extremely well known in the USA, very, very, very high, very large depth of salience. Breadth of salience is another matter, and we've looked at that in earlier sessions. Starbucks constantly trying to broaden its salience away from just being a coffee shop to being a place to eat and so on. But you can see here a typical US Starbucks branch. And the task here is not to build awareness, but to get these people to buy more products, to buy more food products, to come in for their lunch, to come in later in the day to buy a piece of cake, and not just to sit with one coffee for 3 hours and use the free Wi-Fi. So it's always a good idea when we are grappling with a big, difficult subject like this to go back to the academic literature and see what scholars suggest. So if we look at this all-important dilemma of should we standardize, should we adapt, what should we standardize, what should we adapt? And we go back to the literature, we see a number of key points. Levitt, back in 1983, in that very, very famous paper, The Globalization of Markets, which was published in the Harvard Business Review, was probably the first person to really write about the fact that standardization is driven by globalization. The more we globalize, the more we standardize our marketing. Globalization means that products and services move around the world quickly and cheaply. People move around the world quickly and cheaply. They communicate with each other across countries by telephone, on the internet. They consume the same media very often. They are joined by social media. And that means that they see what each other is doing, how each other is living, and their demand for certain sorts of goods and services starts to coalesce, starts to become more homogeneous. And this is really what has driven the global consumer culture segment. Those younger, affluent people consuming their Starbucks and wearing their Converses and so on. Balbaki and Malhotra reminded us that it is essential to start with market segmentation. Our starting point in deciding what to standardize and what to adapt is looking at how markets are segmented on a country by country basis. If that market segmentation shows that buyer behavior is homogeneous across countries and segments, in other words, buyers pretty much want the same, do the same everywhere, then standardize what you do. And that's very often the case in business-to-business marketing, as I mentioned already. However, if buyer behavior is heterogeneous, if there are significant differences in what people want, how they consume products, etc., then you need to adapt or customize what you do. Quelch and Hoff gave us a very useful rule of thumb for thinking about this. The more culture bound the product, the greater the need for adaptation. In other words, the more the product is bound up with local country culture, then the more the marketers need to adapt to that local country culture on a country by country basis. And the most culture bound products tend to be found in the kitchen. Food products, soft drinks, etc. We think about rice, for example, the way that rice is purchased, cooked and consumed in China or Japan or Thailand is radically different from the way it is purchased, cooked and consumed in the USA. In Asian countries, it's sold in many, many different varieties, in large sacks and used all the time. In the USA, it's sold in small quantities, often in microwavable single-serve pots or easy cook or ready cooked and just ready to microwave. So a completely different approach, a product that is heavily bound up with culture, and therefore our adaptation of marketing is required. Now, it is important to remember that standardization can operate at varying levels with a brand. We can have a standardized brand strategy and positioning, but then adaptations elsewhere. We can have a standardized brand strategy and positioning, largely standardized brand elements such as brand name, logo, brand colors, slogan, and also largely standardized secondary associations that we leverage by linking the brand to a global celebrity or to its country of origin. But then we can modify the pricing or the distribution channels on a country by country basis. Or we can standardize everything. We can standardize strategy, positioning, brand elements, secondary associations, and all the elements of the operational marketing mix, the marketing programs, such as the product, flavors, pack sizes, formulations, pricing, distribution channels, advertising, etc. That is actually quite rare. And most global brands have some degree of adaptation, even if it is only at the marketing mix element level. Coca-Cola, for example, doesn't taste the same everywhere. The recipe is adjusted slightly around the world to account for different taste preferences in relation to sugar. And pricing varies too, distribution channels also. The types of packs that are used, multi-packs, cans versus bottles, large plastic PET bottles are only sold in parts of the world where people have big fridges and big kitchen cupboards. And the last point I want to mention on this slide, at the bottom, we see mandatory versus discretionary adaptation. What does that mean? Well, we always have to bear in mind that sometimes we are forced to adapt elements of a product or its marketing on a country by country basis to conform with legal regulations, local regulatory requirements and so on. And that is called mandatory adaptation. So an obvious example there would be left-hand drive versus right-hand drive cars. Some countries in the world drive on the left, some drive on the right, and the steering wheel in the car needs to be moved accordingly. That's a mandatory adaptation. Companies really have to do it in order to make their cars operate in each driving regime around the world. Other forms of adaptation are not mandatory but are known as discretionary. These are changes or adaptations that the marketeers make because nobody's forcing them to do it, but they choose to do it because they know it will make the brand more competitive, more successful. An example there would be changing the name of Jif cream cleanser, a household kitchen cleaning product that was originally in the UK called Jif, J-I-F, changing it to Cif, C-I-F. Now that change was not mandatory, but it was decided to go ahead with it to make the product easier to pronounce, the brand name easier to pronounce in all countries in the world. The letter J was problematic because it's not pronounced J everywhere. Sometimes it's a H, sometimes it's a Y sound. And so it was confusing. So to have a consistent brand name everywhere, the decision was made to change it to Cif, but that was a discretionary, not a mandatory adaptation. So for our next scheduled class sessions, what I'd like you to do is to look at each of these brands, the iPhone, Red Bull, Nike, React, Certu, Black, Volt trainers, Uncle Ben's Rice, MasterCard, and the BMW 5 Series Touring. And have a look at how these products, how these brands are marketed in a selection of different countries around the world. And see if you can note down what stays the same, if anything, in these countries, and what changes, what adaptations are made, either to brand elements, to brand positioning, or to the marketing programs, the pricing, distribution channels, product features, etc. And bring your thoughts with you to our class. The final part of our session today is all about building a global brand and some hints and tips to make that as successful as possible. To build a global brand, you're building global customer-based brand equity. And actually that can sometimes mean that you need to adapt elements of your marketing. You need to modify your marketing. As I've said, in the world of consumer marketing, complete and utter standardization everywhere is really quite rare. So the starting point is market research. Know your customer. Identify differences across countries in consumer behavior. How customers purchase, how they use products, what they know about brands, including your brand, what they feel about brands. And then make adjustments to the branding program. Make adjustments to brand elements. Maybe you need to change a color, like Red Bull did for the Chinese market. They didn't just change the color, they changed the shape of their can. from a tall, thin can to a shorter, squatter, more solid, fatter can with gold and red colours instead of blue and silver? Do you need to change any of the supporting marketing programs? Do you need to change the price? Do you need to use different distribution channels in certain countries, vending machines in Japan, for example? Do you need to leverage secondary associations differently in certain countries? Nike are very good at this by tapping into regional and sometimes even country-specific sports stars and not necessarily just using the same celebrities to endorse the brand everywhere. Perhaps your country of origin isn't so important in some parts of the world, and so don't leverage that, leverage other secondary associations. So there may be changes that are required in the secondary associations that are used to bolster and contribute to brand equity. So here's an example of a brand which has made a number of adjustments over time, over different parts of the world. Here we've got British Kit Kat. Now, Kit Kat in the UK normally looks like the picture on the left. We've got the Nestle corporate brand shown endorsing Kit Kat, and you've got the bright red colour, you've got the famous font and the oval shape in which the brand name appears. Sometimes they have limited edition special varieties, special flavours, BritCat capitalising on the Olympics or the Queen's Jubilee or something like that, but generally it's pretty consistent. Here we have Kit Kat in China, and you can see that a number of adjustments or adaptations have been made to leverage appropriate secondary associations. Here, the secondary associations that have been leveraged are Chinese New Year. So 2016 was the year of the monkey, and that is appearing very strongly on Kit Kat's packaging. And in Japan, Kit Kat has taken on a completely different existence, a life of its own, as a large range of gift products based around the original four-finger wafer biscuit, but with a huge range of flavours and accompanying drinks and alcoholic drinks and cakes and so on. And this is because the name Kit Kat sounds very similar to the Japanese phrase for "will bring you good luck." And so Kit Kat is given as a gift for students taking exams, or a young person taking their driving test, or things that require a good luck gift from family and friends. Now, Kit Kat management, brand management, have been smart enough to allow these adaptations to take place. And so the brand is not exactly the same everywhere. You can see that some things are the same, the name and the logo, but other things have been allowed to adapt, and the brand is extremely profitable as a result. So there are a number of questions that we can ask ourselves when we think about global brand positioning. Remember that branding is all about the knowledge that exists in the mind of the customer. Brand equity exists in the customer's mind in the form of a mental map. These nodes of knowledge and associations that the customer has in their mind about the brand. So if you're thinking about global branding, you need to map out your customers' minds in all of the different countries and compare them. How appropriate is the positioning from the core market or the domestic market in all of these different countries? What's the existing level of awareness? How valuable are the core brand associations? Do the points of parity work in this market? Do the points of difference work given the competition? Is the competition the same? What changes should we make to the brand's positioning? Do we need to create any new associations? You've just seen that Kit Kat have done that very cleverly, particularly in Japan, by positioning the brand as a range of gift products with associations capitalising on gift giving. Are there any existing associations that we need to avoid in certain country markets, that we need to play down or move away from? Are there any modifications to brand knowledge that need to be made? How can we create this new mental map? How do we go about building new knowledge? Should we use advertising? Can we still use the same kinds of marketing programs? Does advertising work in the same way, or do we have to have a very different approach? Distribution channels, will our distribution be the same or will it be different? What new marketing activities are necessary to build positioning in the new country market? Now, some things do work everywhere. Brand positioning that relies heavily on visuals, that doesn't use many words, is a good thing. The more words you have, the more you have to translate into different languages, and the more chance there is for something to be mistranslated or for meaning to be lost in the translation. So relying on visuals is a good thing. Apple have done this extensively with their iPods, with their iPhones, with iPads, etc. Particularly the very iconic iPod advertising campaign from some years ago that was sort of white outline, black graphical images of people with dancing to music with the white headphones. Very, very powerful, but very simple visual images that were easy to use in all parts of the world because there was no words. Music can be very powerful too, and if you can associate your brand with a piece of music, a jingle, then that can work everywhere. There are some universal positioning themes that people respond to positively pretty much everywhere in the world. The promise of superior quality or value, well, that goes down there everywhere, but well, everywhere. And if your brand truly is superior quality or value, then you can position it in that way everywhere. Being brand new also is exciting and relevant as a positioning strategy everywhere, always provided that you are brand new everywhere. Remember Guinness. Guinness was new in some parts of the world, but very far from new in others. So that could not be a standardized strategy. But if the brand genuinely is new to the market everywhere, then that is a perfectly valid positioning strategy to use. Some country of origin to product category links work everywhere. French wine, Italian fashion, German engineering excellence. These tend to be globally recognized as good, strong, positive countries of origin for these product categories, and therefore can be used all over the place. There can be some global heroes that you could tap into, having a global presence, being market leadership, etc. Global celebrities, and so on and so forth. You have to be a bit careful though. What a brand team sitting in London or New York considers to be a global celebrity may not actually turn out to be the case. So again, you do need to do market research on the ground with customers in all of the different country markets to find out who they admire, who are their heroes, what celebrities they follow, what sports stars, music stars, movie stars they follow. And finding a true global celebrity is not necessarily as easy as it looks. And lastly, it's always best to stress an overall concept and the benefits that something is going to deliver rather than the fine detail of the product itself, because the product itself may change slightly from country to country. The steering wheel of the car may change, the flavour of the yogurt may change, but the overall benefit can be the same. And if that is the same, stress that in your positioning. So here's an example of a global positioning strategy that has been enormously successful, stressing the benefits of the brand and not the details of the product. The brand here is Dove. Dove is owned by Unilever, and the brand's positioning strategy has been centered on feeling comfortable and confident and happy in yourself, regardless of your shape, your size, your age, your skin tone, etc. And this campaign for Real Beauty, has been used in many, many countries all over the world. So the words, the language changes, but the positioning is still the same. Be happy as who you are. So let's finish up with the 10 commandments of global branding. Understand. Do your research to understand the similarities and the differences in the global branding landscape. Don't take any shortcuts. Brand building is a long-term game. Invest in the future, stay for the long haul. Establish a sound marketing infrastructure, linkages with advertising agencies that know local markets, distribution channels, etc. Embrace integrated marketing communications. Be ready to use all of the IMC tools, public relations, experiential marketing and events, sponsorship, sales promotion, advertising, etc. And be ready to embrace different media. Outdoor advertising is particularly useful in Latin American countries. Print media advertising is strongly consumed in Germany, and so on. So be ready to embrace the whole range of promotional and marketing communications tools. Cultivate brand partnerships with celebrities, with key distributors and stockists and retailers, and so on. Get the balance between standardization and customization right. Standardize what you can get away with standardizing without affecting the customer experience. That way you'll keep costs under control. Adapt or customize what you have to respond to local customer needs and to counter strong local competitors. Similarly, get the balance right between global and local control. Leaving everything to local country operating divisions leads to inconsistency and reduced and damaged brand equity. Similarly, standardizing everything from headquarters, particularly in consumer markets, can be very damaging. People in headquarters don't necessarily know what's really going on the ground in local countries. And so you need the local country operators to say, yes, we can keep this standardized, but we need to adapt that to counter a competitor or to meet our customers' needs exactly. Define clear operational or operable guidelines for all countries to follow in the use of brand elements, the use of colours, fonts, packaging, etc., so that there is consistency wherever consistency is required. Implement a global brand equity measurement system. We looked at that in an earlier session and we based it on the brand value chain. So you can go back and refresh that if you need to. And lastly, leverage all brand elements, brand name, brand logo, symbols, colours, packaging, brand characters, jingles, secondary associations, and so on. The 10 commandments of global branding. So that's all for this session. Remember to bring your thoughts to class on the various pickup points that we've gone through. I hope you've enjoyed this session, but for now, goodbye.